What's going on, everyone? We are back for part 2 of the How to Lock In series. This is the final episode. If you don't know who I am, my name is Katkov. I'm the founder of UofTearless. Back in 2024, I went from my lowest grade ever, a 37%, to the top 4% of all first years in my program while only studying 2 hours a day. So I used to study 8 hours a day, struggle with ADHD, all of that. I couldn't focus for the life of me. Now, I can pretty much lock in all day if I actually wanted to. You know, I do a lot of other work aside from school. School takes up roughly 2 hours. I breeze through exams and never really stress. So I'm going to show you exactly how I do that. I'm a 4th year in university studying in the psychology specialist program, and I focus on memory enhancement and adaptive learning. So everything that I say here is going to be based off of psychology. This is a 3-step system on how to actually lock in. In the previous video, if you haven't watched that, I would go ahead and watch it first because this is going to make way more sense. We basically talked about the approach that you need to take in order to lock in. Basically manipulating the system in your environment and conditioning yourself to have new responses for certain stimuli. That is the premise behind it. I would go back and watch it. It's a huge amount of information that you do need to know, and let's get right into this video. So, number 1, what is the first step of how to actually lock in? Well, we're gonna base a lot of this on positive psychology. For those of you who don't know what positive psychology is, it's basically the science of an optimal state of consciousness or an optimal life, right? It's like, it's not the absence of bad, but it's everything above that. What's adding good. That's positive psychology. And part of that is the mind. So, how to lock in, there's something called a flow state. A flow state, the term flow was first coined by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He is a psychology researcher and one of the godfathers of cognitive and positive psychology, but he essentially determined that the flow state was an optimal state of consciousness where if you ever have been in the library and you've been locked in and time just kind of flows by, right? You don't really notice that it's gone and you kind of look up, you're like, oh, I got all this work done, right? That's flow, right? You can get it while doing activities like, let's say you were to go on a run, right? You can be in flow. You're just like, the first little bit might be hard, but then, you know, towards the end, you're like, oh, I'm just kind of feeling this, right? Like, yeah, or like you're baking or reading a book and you just kind of get lost in it, right? That's flow. So I'm going to teach you how to get into flow on command here in the next roughly 15, 20 minutes or so. So flow state, first of all, now you know what it is, but how does it work? So the flow state, it comes in something called the flow cycle. The flow cycle looks something like this. Let's say that there's a big wheel. The first stage, this is stage 1 right here, this is going to be the struggle phase. This is where it's pretty hard to do any work. It's when you're sitting down and you're like, I don't want to do this, right? That's the struggle phase. That's where most people get derailed. They never actually get into the rest of the cycle. The struggle phase lasts anywhere from like 10 to 15 minutes. But it also could be faster depending on how often you get into flow, because the more often you get into flow, the easier it is to get past the struggle phase. But let's say on average it's roughly 10 minutes. The second phase right here is the transition stage. And the transition phase, this is where you go from struggle to the third stage, which I'll cover in just a second. But the transition phase, this is where you'll start to feel the shift, right? If things start to become easier. And it could last anywhere from like a minute to maybe 2-3 minutes, right? You kind of notice that things are kind of fading away, but you're also not like aware enough to really be like, oh my gosh, things are fading away. Next one, this is the flow phase. This is where everything becomes easy. This is the phase you want to be in. This is the slice of the pie that everybody is smiling. In flow phase, the reason you kind of get lost in it, you're like, whoa, I just did all that work, right? When you come out, is because there's something called transient hypofrontality. Transient hypofrontality, well, hypofrontality basically means less hypo, right? Frontality, the frontal lobe. So hypofrontality, downregulation of the frontal lobe. And this whole term, transient hypofrontality, basically means the loss of awareness, of self-awareness, because the self-awareness part comes from the frontal lobe, right? That is your planning, your higher level consciousness. So if you downregulate that, you kind of just lose your sense of self and you're just like locked in, essentially. And one of the fastest ways to get transient hypofrontality is just by walking. You kind of just move and you're like, oh, I've kind of lost, whoa, where'd I go? Oh, I missed a turn, right? It's pretty easy to do because the behavior of walking is so easy, right? And so the goal is one way to make flow easier is to limit the struggle phase is to make whatever you're doing easier. And we'll get to that in a minute. Then after that, it's the recovery phase. How long you stay in flow will determine how long your recovery needs to be. Flow if you practice it, can last up to like 2 hours if you really force it. For me, I've been practicing it for a while. It used to be like 30 minutes, but now I can hold flow for roughly 90 minutes. That's what I do in my block. Yeah, 30 to 90 minutes. Pomodoro technique, a lot of you guys know that. That's 25 minutes on. I think it's 5 minutes off, and then you do that again and again, right? I do something different. My flow phase is it's structured more towards maximizing how much time I spend in flow. I don't want to get out of flow every 25 minutes, right? I'm on a roll. Those extra 15 minutes that I'm doing every 30 minutes, right? The 5, right? If I take out 5 minutes from every 30 minutes, that's an extra 15 minutes of flow. I don't want to get rid of that. Plus, I get the interruption, right? But it depends on your stamina. The longer you are in flow, the longer you practice flow and getting into flow, the easier it is to be in flow and sustain it. And also there's a bunch of things that can help you expand and stretch your capacity. I like to do, for every 90 minutes, I take 30 minutes off and actually go do something fun, go talk to a friend, right? I would do this in the library. What I like to do is 3 by 90-minute W for work, and then 30 minutes recovery. Moving on. Once you have a flow state, then what do? Well, there's flow triggers, right? And I told you we get into this in a bit. Well, what are flow triggers? Flow triggers are pretty much anything that helps you get into a flow state. And we talked about making it easier, right? The struggle phase, how to shorten the struggle phase. By the way, if you want more information on flow, there is a free PDF that breaks down all of this in a ton of detail and shows you exactly how to implement it step by step into a daily routine, why things work, how things work, and how to actually apply it to your life. You can go download it for free at UofTearless.com. It comes with an audiobook too, because I want people to know how to focus, because it was so hard for me to focus with ADHD, and I don't want you guys to go through that. So I made that for free. I also made a bunch of other free ebooks. And then to apply this to your actual study system, there's also my full video series on how to study that you can go implement it with that. But this is gonna make all studying easier. So go download that free ebook. Anyway, flow triggers, let's get back right to it. All right, what's the first flow trigger? Probably the easiest thing on earth that none of you do. Everybody says you love it, but none of you do it. What is it? Sleep. Right? Sleep. Just sleep more. Right? The more you sleep, the more neurological activity you have, the easier it is to bypass the struggle phase. What is the second one? Well, it's probably one that you already do and you're probably addicted to it, and it's caffeine. So sleep and caffeine, those are your two biggest ones. There are a bunch of other ones that a lot of you don't realize, and one of them is something called chrononutrition. Chrononutrition, so this is in terms of supplements, but chrononutrition is the science of the timing of food. So basically, your body runs on biological systems. These systems have different timings. You've probably heard of the circadian rhythm for sleep, but there's also other rhythms like the ultradian rhythm, right? So all of your different body systems run on different clocks. Some happen more than once a day, some happen less than once a day. Sleep, it's once a day, right? Your circadian rhythm. So that circadian rhythm, by the way, does not just refer to sleep. It refers to anything that happens on a daily basis. And then there is one other thing, which is hydration. The more hydrated you are, the easier it is to bypass the struggle phase. Basically, you want to put your body in an optimal state of amazingness. These are the 4 main flow triggers, but there are also a few other ones, right? In terms of supplements, you can also have something like beta-alanine, citrulline malate. There's also L-theanine. By the way, L-theanine, if you take it with caffeine, it has the ability to minimize the jitteriness effect and actually help caffeine last longer. So, you want to take this L-theanine in a 2-to-1 ratio here with caffeine. So if caffeine, let's say you have like 30 milligrams, then you would want to have 60 mg of L-theanine. Beta-alanine, it's basically a vasodilator. It helps, anything that helps promote blood flow to the brain. So vasodilator, it expands your blood vessels, right? It's going to feel a little tingly. A lot of people use it for pre-workout, but I also use it to focus. I take it before my midterms and finals. By the way, I also have my full 1-hour pre-exam protocol to get into a flow state as easy as possible on the exam. So if you want that, it's free. Go check that out. UofTearless.com. And citrulline malate is another one that helps promote, the cardiovascular system. So more blood flow. After the flow triggers, what do? Well, now you have the flow application and timing. You have the flow timing. This is probably the most important one because there are certain times of the day. Well, one, it's just when you do it in the day, but two, how you structure it in the day, right? That's a huge component of flow. So timing flow is essential to being able to maximize the duration of it and the ease of getting into it. So it could technically be classified as another flow trigger if you put it in at the right time. That you could just do it as like temporal training, I guess, just like training yourself to get into flow at certain times of the day, which actually I've kind of done, but not on purpose, just because it's easier to focus, so I do it more at that time, and then as a result, it gets easier and easier to get into flow at that time, and then later in the day, it gets harder and harder. How do you do this? What's the optimal timing? Well, we kind of covered a little bit of it here, right? The first thing is you want to get into flow when you have the most energy. This depends on genetics, right? Some people are naturally morning people. Some people are naturally nighttime people, like larks, right? A lark is a term for anyone who's more of a nighttime person. Their circadian rhythm is shifted more towards the night, or they want to be awake a little bit later, wake up a little bit later, right? I cannot do that, but some people, they do, right? So yeah, that depends on when you have the most energy, you want to make sure that you're maximizing that. The second thing is what you eat in the morning, right? There is nothing special about waking up early, but there is absolutely something special about working after your longest uninterrupted period of sleep. So whether that's in the morning or later in the afternoon, right? You basically just want to get up and work immediately, because why? The brain waves of sleep are very similar to the brain waves of flow. So if you work in something that's pretty similar, it's pretty easy to transition, right? If you eat fat, your body has a easier time storing the fat as opposed to protein, where it has to convert it and do all this energy and then store it as fat, right? It's pretty hard to do. So yeah, that has to do with when you wake up, basically wake up and work as soon as possible. The second thing, right, after you work after waking, this is the second rule that I have. This kind of goes into chrononutrition a little bit here, and it's to work fasted but hydrated. Why fasted? Well, because when you divert blood to the stomach to digest food, it takes it away from the brain. You're not as focused, right? And actually what you eat will have a huge impact. We talked about chrononutrition, not just timing, but also what you eat, high flow foods. Those are things that are generally like, if you ever eat a ton of carbs and you get really sleepy, it's not because carbs are bad for you, it's just because you get a carb crash, right? You don't want to work. So what I'll do if I don't eat anything first, like if I have to eat something because I have something to do after it, like let's say I have morning practice for the rowing team, right? I'll just eat yogurt. And then as soon as I'm walking out the door, I'll just have a couple toaster waffles on the way out, right? But the yogurt is not going to have a huge spike in insulin, which means that I can focus pretty well. So yeah, that's like one of the examples. I would go look at the flow PDF if you want to know what's a high flow food, what's not a high flow food. But yeah, so work fasted and hydrate, because again, hydration, it makes the struggle phase much easier to bypass, get into the transition phase, flow phase. Okay, so work fasted but hydrated. And then the second caveat to this is have caffeine as long as it's 1.5 hours after you wake up, 90 minutes after waking. Okay, people have probably told you to wait to have caffeine before, and you're probably like, yeah, okay, sure, but like why, right? Well, the reason why is because when you wake, you naturally, your cortisol rises, and the receptors in your brain that cause you to feel tired, they get taken up by cortisol first. So you actually don't want to slam it with caffeine, because then all the cortisol will just be there, right? And like you naturally have this boost, and so use it, right? You naturally have the cortisol boost to block the tiredness receptors. Then you throw caffeine in there too. Once the cortisol has kind of been transported away, the caffeine comes in, then it kicks in, boom, you're not tired again. Right? So you have basically 2 rounds of caffeine, but one of them is natural and you don't need to do anything. So that's why you wait. And the problem is if you take caffeine too early, it just sits there. It doesn't actually do anything. But be careful, because if you're in a fasted phase, it's going to have a much greater effect. I would start with like half of your dose, see how you feel within like 20 minutes. And then if you feel good, you can have a little bit more and just keep adding it in. Then after like 3-4 days, you'll know, okay, this is how much I can have in the morning. But also, what I would recommend for caffeine, you want to have a break. I know none of you are going to do this, but I'm going to tell you to do it anyway. Every 3rd day, so 1 out of 3 days, take no caffeine break. And then there's also, for the longer extended times, it also kind of goes with your work cycles in the year. But I would definitely go read the Flow PDF, but it's basically going to tell you how to do this to make it effective as possible. So once per week, just have a day with no caffeine. It's going to suck, but just throw it in on like a Saturday or a Sunday when you don't have anything to do, because it's going to make caffeine way more effective. And the last thing, final part, is that you want to structure your flow blocks. And I'll explain what this means. By the way, guys, before we go into this, I just want to let you know that I do have a full video series that explains exactly how I study. So this tells you how to get locked into study, but I do have a full video course if you want to know how I study 2 hours a day and still breeze through all my exams while taking a full course load. Then definitely go check that out. It's on UofTearless.com. Just type in UofTearless.com or use the link in the description. I basically made it so that the first year version of myself would never have to look for any other thing again. It is exactly step by step. I even made example lectures that show you exactly how to apply all of the principles. And if you want a more general overview to know what that's like, to make sure that you actually want to use the system that I use, there is another video that I will link in the description where it basically goes over the full framework that I use to study. And if you want more in-depth on that, if you like it, go check it out on my website, the full video series, which is like 30 videos or something like that. And basically, you watch that, you'll never have to struggle in school again. So let's get into this flow blocking here. What is flow blocking? Well, flow blocking basically means when you structure your flow blocks. A flow block would be 90-minute window, 30-minute window, whatever it is. But you want to make sure that you don't do too many at once, because if you're just starting out, you're new to flow, then it is very hard to sustain, right? So there are neurotransmitters in your brain that allow you to get into flow, but you can exhaust them a lot faster when you're not used to having that. There's something called long-term potentiation, which basically means there are more connections of neurons in your brain and stronger connections, and they produce more neurotransmitters, the signals from neurons. So there are more of them, and they're stronger, and on the other side, it's more receptive, right? And so all of these things allow you to stay in flow longer with the longer you do it. It's like exercising a muscle, right? The more you do it, the stronger it gets. So if you're just starting out, you don't want to try to bench press 225 because you're probably just going to get crushed, right? You don't want to try to do a 90-minute block if you've never done flow before, because 30 minutes might be your max, 20 minutes might be your max. Like when I started out, I could barely focus for like 10 minutes. I was like, 10 minutes, this is great. Like I used to just sit in the library for 8 hours and probably study for 1. If you're just starting out, this is what I'm gonna recommend. Pomodoro technique, I don't usually recommend it, but fine. Pomodoro technique, 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. The reason I don't recommend it is because I think you can do a lot longer than that, and most people can, and then the timer goes off and they're like, oh man, I was actually in flow, that was pretty good, and then they have trouble getting back into it, right? So this is going to help you get into flow. Once you're in flow, it's pretty easy to sustain as long as you don't get distracted. So if you're working with friends, only work with friends who don't talk to you, or work with only one person, because if you're not talking, they can't talk. Over time, you're going to increase this, and you might even need to increase this, or you could keep it the same. I've even done times where I've done like 45 minutes on. This is one I really liked when I was kind of intermediate with flow, 45 minutes on, and then I would do 5 minutes off. And I would just cycle that twice. If you're a morning person like me, then I would do 2 flow cycles back to back in the morning, wait a little bit, do another one midday, 1, 2 p.m. You're probably gonna be tapped out if you're new, okay? If you are a nighttime person, maybe 1 right after you wake up. Just try to knock out some work and then save the hard stuff for later in the day when you're just, you really gotta gnarl it in. So that is how I go about blocking flow. This is the science behind actually locking in, getting into a flow state, getting that transient hypofrontality, getting so locked in that you forget that everything else exists and the work just continues. If you like this video, subscribe. Let me know down in the comments what concepts you want to hear about next, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.